we'll see a deal soon.
Gaza, we got most of the hostages back. We're going to have another 10 coming very shortly, and we hope to have that finished pretty quickly. And Steve Witkoff has been fantastic. He's done a great job in that.
Here now is Hal Kempfer, retired lieutenant colonel and Marine intelligence officer. Thank you for joining us. A lot of questions for you here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because this is something that really seems to keep being dragged out here. We've been watching the back and forth in these discussions and negotiations. We keep hearing that a ceasefire deal is close. What are you hearing, or what do you think is holding up these negotiations?
Well, Kelly, there's a 60-day ceasefire agreement that's been on the table for a while. They've been trying to work this thing. It's an interim agreement. It's not a full peace agreement at the end. The hope is that it'll buy time to put a peace agreement in there. However, it's kind of gone back and forth. Israel's made a number of concessions. They just made more concessions on the Philadelphia corridor, narrowing the amount of area they want to control. But one of the problems is Hamas keeps going back to its more absolutist position, if you will. They want a full withdrawal of Israeli forces, and that's just simply not going to happen. And that seems to be the sticking point, but they are, I hate to say very close because we've been here so many times before, but there does seem to be, at least from all the other parties, kind of ignoring some of the Hamas rhetoric, they do seem to be getting a lot closer than they've been in recent weeks.
Absolutely. And just to give viewers at home a sense, I've been at the White House and we've seen officials. We saw Israel's prime minister there last week for having dinners each night with the president. We saw that the Qatari PM was there at the White House having a late dinner with the president as well. So this is certainly something that the president is working on, even behind the scenes when the cameras are off. We know he said last night when he was at the White House with congressional Republicans, he said, quote, 10 hostages in Gaza, 10 more hostages, that could be coming very shortly, he said. I've been talking with sources this morning. They say they're working through, quote, the keys here, meaning hostages, who is alive, who is dead, also looking on the mechanism for humanitarian aid. In principle, they agreed on everything else, but there are layers here. You have to go from Hamas in Doha to Hamas in Gaza to the Israeli cabinet. So hopefully, they seem to be working through this, but it might not be as soon as people are thinking. Is this similar to what you've been hearing about this? What's the holdup here?
That is a big sticking point. And of course, making sure that the 10 live hostages are actually alive, of course, is a big part. There's also 18 deceased hostages that are supposed to be exchanged. There seems to be some sort of sticking point on the Palestinian prisoners that will be released from Israel. I guess they're trying to figure out, it seemed to be a number saying, and maybe it might have been a composition thing in terms of who is being released. That seemed to be a big issue. And then the GHF, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which right now is the only organization that's providing aid to Gazans. That seems to be a big sticking point for Hamas. They want them out of there, and they want all the other NGOs and the UN back in there providing aid. And if you look at the math on the ground as far as where they have those sites and stuff, there is a little bit of logic to what the Hamas is saying there, because if Israel pulls back, there will be a need for more distribution sites, more than what the GHF currently has.
And Israel is reportedly working on a plan for the relocation of Palestinians out of Gaza. That's following talks with several countries like Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Libya. The plan is extremely controversial, with many concerned this is forced displacement, despite Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu insisting it would be voluntary. What would the consequences be to a move like this?
Well, this is somewhat unprecedented in many ways. I would say unprecedented in the modern era. But what it really is it gets down to the Geneva Convention. This is a forced dislocation of people. That is prohibited under the international law of war. It's under international law, I should say. And so that's what the sticking point is. Now, of course, the Israeli position is this is a voluntary thing. They can leave if they want to. But the alternative is setting up these camps. And the way the camps are set up is they're concentrated areas where you go into the camp, and once you do all the screening to get into the camp, you can't leave. Concentrate areas with camps you can't leave. Obviously, the international discourse has been that sounds a lot like a concentration camp. And of course, if the alternative for leaving is a concentration camp, you can imagine how this is setting on with the Europeans and various allies in the Middle East and elsewhere.
And Pope Leo, he's renewing calls for a ceasefire after speaking with Netanyahu, who apologized for a deadly attack on Gaza's only Catholic church. Could a mistake like this ramp up international pressure even more so to end this war?
Well, it does kind of undermine moral authority. I got to tell you, I've been involved with targeting stuff for a long time. Mistakes do happen, and there's nothing to suggest that this was anything other than a mistake, that they actually hit this the only Catholic church that's in the Gaza Strip. It's a horrible mistake. Obviously, the priest that was one of those who were killed was a priest. He was very close to Pope Francis when Pope Francis was alive, and so there's repercussions that come from this, and it gets into all of the Israeli targeting. There have been a number of disputed situations where they say the Israelis are targeting Gazans collected for getting aid and a variety of other things throughout the entire war. So that is a big issue, and they're going to have to address this more forcefully, and it might be a change in the targeting methodology when this is all done.
And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he's doubling down on the success of the strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, despite new reports indicating that not all sites were completely destroyed. Let's take a listen to that and talk on the other side.
Of course, those 3 nuclear sites in Iran, which were obliterated, in case our press can't figure that out, which they seem to not be able to do. And the more we report and the more we see, the more we understand how devastating those attacks were on all 3 of those nuclear sites.
And this is something I actually pressed the Secretary of Defense on when he held that briefing at the Pentagon a few weeks ago. And I asked, too, when we will see that final report, if they are able to share what they can share. And he did say, whatever we're able to share, we will, but some of it will have to remain confidential. When do you think that might come out?
Well, hopefully it'll come out fairly soon. There's a lot of dispute on this. Of course, the Fordo site, where we hit it with those GBU-57, those massive ordnance penetrators, that's the one that the report basically, or what is said about the report, I should say, is the one where the most damage was created. The other 2 sites, Isfahan and Natanz, those were hit with Tomahawk missiles. Those are not deep penetrator explosive ordnance like you saw at the other site. And that's where there's a dispute as to how much damage was done. Frankly, this thing has been going back and forth. They need to put out something more definitive. By the way, I would just mention, obliterated, it seems to be the term the administration is key on. Obliterated is not a military term. It is not, we talk about destroyed, damaged, we have a bunch of terms, but obliterated seems to be the term that they're all sticking with, and there is no real military definition for obliterated, and I think that seems to be something of a sticking point rhetorically, certainly within the current administration.
Yeah, something to point out there. I wanted to turn to this story about Russian interference. If you could weigh in, Trump's intelligence chief, Tulsi Gabbard, she's accusing former President Obama and others of, quote, a treasonous conspiracy for alleging President Trump's 2016 election win was due to Russian interference. As a retired Marine intelligence officer, what do you think about that?
Well, I think they're going to have to put out a lot of evidence on that. That was a rather stunning claim. That President Obama and others around him had actually kind of manufactured all this stuff about Russian collusion and Russian interference with the election. And they're going to have to put out some very hard evidence because this is obviously, to say this is, it seems very partisan would be a bit of an understatement. And to hear this from the Director of National Intelligence, this is not something you say casually if you're in the DNI position. So they're going to have to put out something. And by the way, they're going to have to look at this very hard because there's going to be sources and methods that could be compromised in how they came to this conclusion. And they're going to have to do it in a bipartisan fashion before Congress to make sure it's fully understood. I don't know if they're ever going to be able to really do that beyond what was done before, because it was so partisan before. I can't imagine this would be any less partisan.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you. Well, Russia launching a massive